Hello and welcome back to my channel, Rover Turbo. In this video, a new day on the Corsa. If you saw the last video, you saw getting the engine out of the car. So somehow or another I've got to get this engine over, I'll show you in a second, and start stripping it down, start getting the head off and having a look at the head gasket. Got it out of here without removing the gearbox, drive shaft, suspension. Somehow or another I've got to get that into there. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that. There's another engine here that's been on a pallet for another project. Right, there you go. I'm out of breath now. As you can see, that was hard work. Kind of used the momentum of the engine because everything was just digging in. I hate working outside in the mud, but I haven't got any other option. So it is what it is, as they say. So now I've just got to decide what I'm going to do. I have got an engine stand there, so I could put it on the engine stand. So we've got a couple of bolts here, one there, one there, one there. That holds the heat shield on, and then the lander just goes through the hole, the plug. And then we've got two bolts, one there, which are these two bolts here, which is just a support bracket, and then we've got a load of 10 mils across here, 7 of them I believe. They all came out and a stud came out, which is not a problem. Used to be a WD-40 impact gun, 10 mil, and then yeah, basically that is the exhaust manifold and decat. Not decat. So that's the exhaust manifold and cap. I didn't mention on my last video that that something was wrong. I thought something was up with the oil filter. When I took this out, the filter was all crumbled up, and there's a non-return valve. It's supposed to be a non-return valve in the bottom here, where the oil drains away back into the sump. It wasn't doing that. It was still filled up with oil, and that one-way valve seems like it's stuck, and the oil isn't draining away. So I don't know if there's something wrong with this, because I'm pretty sure when you take the oil filter out, the oil's supposed to drain away. And then the inlet, we've just got some 10 mils probably. I think they're 10 mils down in there. I'll show you when I get closer to that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put all the bolts back in where they went. I mean, these are the exhaust manifold bolts. They're obviously the exhaust manifold bolts. Moving on to the inlet manifold, basically I've just disconnected everything on this side of the engine, the hose, this which goes around here, they just unplug. We've got coil, I think that's the EGR valve, and then we've got an earth wire there, and then this is the front lambda sensor, and then everything else, all of this cabling now all looks like it's all attached to the inlet manifold. So as soon as we've undone those bolts and removed that, the whole thing should come away as one. Obviously it's a lot easier when it's out of the car, which is the whole reason why I've done this. So let's get these bolts out. I think there are 10. No, they're not. They're the inverted Torx, VE, so I'll find out what that is. So these are a bit different from the 4 cylinders by the look of it. There's one there, there's one down there which you can get through here, and there's 2 at the end. That looks like that's it. So I'm going to whiz those out. It's an E12. Nope, they're E10s, but you can use 11 and you can use 12. So we're going to whiz those out. This one is ridiculously tight. I don't know why, but it looks like it's been sitting in a puddle of water. Now it's turning. I've turned it, but I don't know whether this is snap off tight or whether it's just a bit corroded in there. We'll find out in a minute. Right, I've got no idea what's going on here, but there's 2 bolts down here, and I couldn't get the socket on, but there was a little bit of stone or rock that was jammed up inside, so it wouldn't go on. But the top one is turning, well, I've turned it a millimetre of a turn, and then it's bound up again, so I don't know what's going to happen on that one. And the lower one, I've just got that out, so hopefully that will start to undo. But these two are being a right pain. But as I say, there's a little puddle of water that's sitting in there. I don't know whether you can see that. See? And I think it might have just corroded the threads. I don't really want to damage anything. So those two bolts snapped off. So I don't know what's gone on in there, but this is now loose. So I'm assuming I'm going to have to get those two studs out with a stud extractor. The alternator down here and the starter motor and the crank sensor and the lambda, and then there's a cable clip here. So I need to disconnect the wires from the starter, disconnect the wires from the alternator, take that out of the alternator, that out of the lambda, unplug the crank sensor, and then you can squeeze the tab and pull it out as normal. And don't forget these two. The EGR, and then this should then lift away. I think there's still going to be a connector on the back of the the alternator. On the knock sensor behind her. So yeah, that's, oh shit, bastard. So that's what's happened. Obviously the water's got down in there and it's just corroded the thread. So that's either going to need another head or be drilled and tapped out, which is just a pain. That I might be able to get off. The alternator was just hooked on there, so obviously I've taken that out, put the bolt back in. Starter motor I've bolted back on for the minute, that's properly bolted. I didn't want to leave it sort of just loose. So onto this side here, I have gunned this loose with my big impact. I think it's an E18. Yes, E18. It's full of Loctite, so it doesn't just come undone. There's a little drain bung here in the water pump, so I'm going to take the water pump off. I'm going to drain that into a tin just to save it going all over the place, and then I'll take off the water pump, then obviously the timing cover. So yeah, undone that, drained it into a tin. This just comes off, you don't need a puller, it just pops off. No special tools needed for that. So there's just loads of bolts, try and keep them in order. It's pretty obvious where they go, because if a short one is too short it won't bite, and the long one will have way too much thread on it. So I don't tend to keep them in the right order, but if you need to, then do that. So when I was talking about, we've got those ones which are all the same size, and 3 which are shorter. So it's obvious which goes where, because the long ones go all the way through to the block behind. It's these ones here which are obviously the short ones, because they don't go all the way in. So this is what I was talking about, is it is relatively obvious. So I just got myself a rubber mallet. It is starting to wiggle free. I just need to double check I haven't forgotten any bolts. You can see that this is what happens on these. The rubber that seals the water pump to the block starts to deteriorate. I'll show you when I take it off. Thought I'd bring you in for the money shot. So this is the timing case. It sits so the water pump seals through onto the back. So what starts to happen on these is these rubber pieces which seal between here and here, they all start to deteriorate on the gasket. This gasket here. This is a separate gasket that goes all the way around and seals that on. So obviously we need to take the chain off. It would be interesting to find out whether it's skipped timing again. So that's why it didn't start. it just skipped immediately. See how that's slotted across there, and that one isn't. So as soon as I turned it over, it just skipped again. Head's coming off anyway, and we'll obviously check for valve damage. So we're going to get the chain off, cams out, I'm assuming. Don't know if we have to. Don't think we do. I don't think we have to take the cams out. I think we just need to rotate this cam here so you can get to the bolts. So I'm going to detension this, take the tension off, take all the guides off, take the chain off, take the gasket off, and then we can look at undoing the bolts. Get it off this crane obviously, so hopefully it will just sit. Right, so that's all the chains off, the guides off, and there's this sprocket which just slides off. You get all that, you get the chain and that and everything in the kit and the gasket, and sometimes you get these as well. It's up to you whether you get these in the kit. But what is a little bit worrying on such a low mileage engine is this. I don't think it's been very well looked after in its later life. I mean, the top looks all fine, there's no stress or anything on any of the cams. Don't know whether it's been a problem with that oil filter all along. It hasn't actually been filtering the oil, or it just hasn't had any servicing in its last. I'll have to check out the servicing and stuff, but you've noticed how they put these extra little pieces on where the block meets the head. It's just an extra reinforcement just to stop oil leaking past there. I always put a little bit of silicone on there when I do it. Right, so we got 10 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the head is now loose. So we'll whip it off, get it over on the bench, and we'll look at it. So head is off. I mean, you can see, but I mean that could just be where it's stuck onto the gasket. Obviously I'll need to check this with an engineering rule, and what I'll do is I'll spin over the cams until I get all these valves to shut, and I'll put some liquid in there and see whether they're sealing. But at this point I'll probably overhaul the head anyway, get the valves out, relap them in, make sure they're all good. I mean, it doesn't look like there's been any valve to piston contact, because normally you're seeing little clean marks where the valves have hit. There's obviously been some water in here, you can see. I mean, there are bits of the gasket which are missing, but they could be on the head. I mean, you can just see some dirty, I mean it should be clean like this all the way around, and they're just not, are they? You can see how this is all clean and it's dirty there. We need to check the bores, we need to rotate it round, we need to clean off the top of the pistons, have a look at the pistons, see if they've had any valve contact, and we also need to have a look at the bores, make sure there's no scratches in there or anything at all. Put some liquid inside here, see how fast it falls down into the crankcase, some petrol or something. Right, and on this one you can see it's got a slight bit of seepage, but so you would need to check these valves. There's nothing coming out of the exhaust. I mean, you'd expect a slight bit of seepage because over the years you get pitting and stuff on the valves, so definitely the inlet's on number 3. The rest seem fine. I mean, that's passable, it's not peeing out, but you would want to do something about it at this point. So I need to make a decision. I need to make sure this head is flat. I mean, it'll probably go away for a skim anyway. I'm just doing some tests on these 2 cylinders. Obviously I can't do it on that one because I need to rotate the engine, but these have been filled up here level for 5-10 minutes. So it's not, there's a little bit of seepage, nothing major. You'd expect a tiny little bit of seepage, and there's nothing leaking out. This staining's where I spilled some, so I've dried it all up and it's not leaking out of there. So the valves are sealed, so I think these two were the ones, the weak ones I think. So let me just rotate it and we'll do the same with that one. So I've just borrowed this engineer's rule just to check the flatness, because I'm still undecided what I'm going to do. So, but this is definitely, the head is definitely warped. I don't know if you can see that. It's a bit difficult to pinpoint it on the camera, but there's definitely daylight showing through there, and across there you can see the daylight coming through. I'll get a feeler gauge out and we'll check it with a feeler gauge, giving it a bit of a clean, but again I haven't gone mad with it. So this is definitely going to need a skim. The block, I'm tempted to use this engine because it's a lot of money for an engine. I was looking at the prices of these cars, and yes, a lot of the cars that didn't have 55,000 miles, that had 70, 100,000 miles, you can pick up for £2,000. So yes, mine's a low mileage car and maybe it's worth more, but it makes the market so much smaller, of people who just want a cheap car and not going to spend £3,000, £3,500 on a car just because it's low mileage. A lot of people just want a car and as cheap as possible that will do what they want to do, which is, you know, a car that does 70 or 100,000 miles will do the same thing as one that's done 55 in most people's opinion. That's my opinion anyway. So I've got these feeler gauges out, and we've got two sizes. We've got 0.12 and 0.10. The 0.12, you have to excuse the birds making a bloody noise. So 0.12 does go under in certain positions. But the 0.1 goes under in quite a few places. So especially in between the combustion chambers. So this head's definitely warped by 0.1 of a millimetre. I don't know, in the grand scheme of things, whether that's a lot. I don't know. So I'm just going to try this on the block. I think 0.1, I need to go size smaller. Right, so the smallest size I've got is a 0.38 millimetres. I mean, that's just wafer thin, it's almost hair thin. So I've tried to put that underneath, all over the head in all directions. So I basically put it underneath on top of the feeler gauge and tried to pull the feeler gauge out while pressing down on that. I can't show you because I haven't got anything to hold the camera. And it gets stuck underneath all of them. So that the surface of this is definitely fine. So I've made my decision now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this block, and I'm just going to check that everything's okay with it, with the bores, the bearings, and just make sure everything's okay, and then just, if it's all okay, I'm just going to put it back together. So that's what I'm going to do. So my problem is I'm trying to find a bargain. I'm trying to find it as cheap as possible, which I know is, you know, the worst way you could possibly do it, but I'm trying to do this on a budget. I'm trying to get the best for the best price, basically, and to get a low mileage engine, you know, they're up in £1,000 mark plus delivery, because, you know, none of them are ever close enough. So me having a conscience, I can't just slap in any old, you know, a lot of the engines have got 80, 90, 100,000 miles on them. Now, what have I got to do to them, apart from the chain, which I'll probably end up doing anyway, what have I got to do to them to make them reliable? Because I'm thinking to myself, the easiest thing for me to do is just to put the engine in. It's just to order the engine, screw it, get the engine, get it delivered, put all the ancillaries on it, all the wiring loom, everything, put everything back on the inlet manifold, blah blah blah. I ain't got to worry about the head, the snapped stud in the head, and I can just put the engine in and it's done. That's it. Oil and filter change, do a service on the engine, give it a clean, MOT it, it's done. That car will be perfect for anyone who's starting to learn to drive 1 litre Corsa, low insurance group. It's got half a tank of fuel in it, you know. It won't have by the time I finish with it, but the more and more I'm looking at this engine, I'm just thinking it's just not worth the hassle. I'm going through, to determine whether that bottom end is any good, I've got to strip it down. I've got to completely disassemble that engine. I've got to check all the piston rings. I've got to check all the clearances. I've got to check the bores. I've got to check the crank, all the shells and everything. And by that point, well, you're thinking about are you going to put all the old shells back in and all the old rings back in? Then you'll just think, well, why not just put a low mileage engine in? You know, and I have seen them. There are a few available. Possibly they'll take an offer because I don't know how popular they are and how long they've been sat waiting for someone to buy them. And obviously I've got the issue with the head. The head's going to need work. The head's going to need a skim. The head's probably going to need the valves out. You know, that's all work and time. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it a day now on this. I'm going to tidy up and I'm going to leave it. As I said, I've got a vacation coming up. I've got plenty of time to be just waiting, looking, inquiring. You know, sometimes you can get a bargain from someone who's braking a car, who the engine's in the car and it's braking, you know, and the engine's not out from a scrapyard or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to stop babbling on. I don't know whether this is going to be one whole video. I'm assuming it is, so this is the end of the video. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.